Hello, ELA Masters. It's Miss Yabut here. Wow, I hope that you all learned so much reading our InfoText article today and are so excited to use what we learned in our schema and understand our historical fiction text today. But first, a couple of announcements. If you didn't already this morning, make sure you log on to Lexia for 30 minutes today. You need 150 minutes by Friday. So if you logged on for 30 minutes yesterday, 30 minutes today, and for 30 minutes Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you'll already have 150 minutes. Make sure you do that so we don't get a zero on Lexia. And you have 3 Vista Virtual points that you can earn if you go to office hours today from 2:45 to 4. Remember that yesterday, many of us might have started making a historical fiction journal or just drawing our thoughts on a piece of paper or even a napkin. And your teachers would love to see that during office hours and talk to you about our stories today. Make sure that you attend to earn those 3 Vista Virtual points. As I mentioned yesterday, our challenge is to beat how many people turned in an assignment on Friday, which is 42 students. Today, we're a little bit below that at 36, so make sure that you double check that you answered all the questions in your Google form and clicked Mark as done in order to get credit for turning in your assignment yesterday. And as I mentioned, friends, today we'll continue to learn about historical fiction. Today we are learning about, yes, and how it is different from infotext. As a reminder, scholars, we are going to be asking ourselves this whole unit, how is the setting important to the plot of the story? So yesterday, we learned a lot about internment camps in the 1940s, which is where Japanese Americans were sent during World War II. I need to be asking myself, how is this setting, this time and place, important to the story that we'll be reading today? Then I can ask myself, what stories teach readers about the past? What can these stories show us about what it was like living during that time in the 1940s in the Western United States? And today, we'll pay very close attention to this question. How do readers distinguish fact from fiction when reading historical fiction? First, let's review what we learned about historical fiction from yesterday. Remember that you can go to the resources in your classwork page to find a resource to help you. So I'm going to scroll down to where it says resources and historical fiction. Turn. Historical fiction is an imaginative story that takes place in the historical past and may have some real events or people. My turn. Historical fiction is an imaginative story that takes place in the historical past and may have some real events or people. You try. Historical fiction is an great job, friends. ELA Masters, as a reminder, is historical fiction narrative text like S2RY or infotext? Don't get tricked. Is historical fiction narrative fiction or infotext? Show me narrative infotext. Yes! Wow! Say, we didn't get tricked. Right. Scholars, historical fiction, even though it is set in the historical past and has real events or people, this is still a form of narrative fiction. It is still a make-believe story that comes from the author's imagination. Let's make sure that we add that to our Google form. What kind of text is historical fiction? It is a narrative text. It is make-believe. If you need to, go ahead and pause your video and select that now. Good. ELA Masters, I'm going to give us about 45 seconds to use your resource and answer our next question. Which of the following are characteristics of historical fiction? Select all that apply. Get ready and go. Couple more seconds, friends. Time's up. Let's see what we've got. Our first characteristic of historical fiction is that the setting is important. And this is probably the most important characteristic of historical fiction. So if you got this first answer, that the setting is important, show me a yes. Good. Remember that historical fiction takes place in the historical past. So the time and place that the story takes place, the setting, is going to be very important. Our second characteristic of historical fiction is that it's often focused on real issues of the time and the characters' perspective of them. Yesterday, we read about Japanese American internment camps, which was a real issue at the time. And ELA Masters, we don't have Japanese internment camps anymore, but we are thinking about how during that time in the past, what different characters' perspectives of Japanese Americans were. Let's double check our form. If you picked this answer choice, often focus on real issues of a time in history and characters' perspective of them, can you say, oh yeah? Good. My third characteristic of historical fiction is that some values, perspectives, and living conditions are different from today. ELA Masters, in a lot of your reflections and predictions yesterday about the book that we'll be reading, you all had some really smart ideas and used your own schema about what you know from today. One scholar wrote that Japan is actually a peaceful country, and that is true today. However, we know that it was different in the 1940s during World War II when the country of Japan then attacked the United States. That is different from today, where Japan is actually a peaceful country, and we love and respect Japanese Americans. So let's go to our Google form and double check that we have the last answer choice. Some values, perspectives, and living conditions are different from today. ELA Masters, this second choice, mostly focused on make-believe problems and characters' perspective of them, is not true. These problems, just like the Japanese American internment camps, were actually very real and took place during a real time in history. Let's review. Can you share with me 2 facts that we learned yesterday about Japanese American internment camps? Tell me. Right. The Japanese internment American camps took place from 1942 to 1945 in the western United States, like where Arizona is, or the state of California. And they happened because Japan attacked a part of the United States called Pearl Harbor. So President Roosevelt, the president in 1942, ordered that Japanese Americans be sent to internment camps. And that eventually ended in 1945. Many years later, President Reagan apologized for treating Japanese Americans like that. Our main idea that we came up with was that after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor during World War II, mostly innocent Japanese Americans, so people who didn't do anything wrong, were sent to crowded internment camps because of their race. So if you shared with me or even wrote in your journals about how the internment camps were not fun places, especially for children, they were crowded with families in one room, you are really using your schema, scholars. Can you say, way to go, me? Important to make sure that we read that InfoText article yesterday because as good readers, we often read a nonfiction text before we read the fiction text because it helps build our schema, yes, about the setting and important people and events of the time. This helps us better understand the setting and characters in the fiction text. ELA Masters, I told you that one of the questions we'll be thinking about today is how do readers distinguish fact from fiction when reading historical fiction? Today, we are not going to be reading an info text. We will be reading a historical fiction text called The Bracelet. This text is a make-believe story about a girl named Emmy and her family. They live in California during the 1940s. As I'm reading today, there will be some facts mixed up with fiction. So as a good reader, I need to be asking myself, is this detail from the story fact or fiction? I need to ask myself, is the time, place, important people, or important events real things from history? Are they things that we read about yesterday? So this is fact. This is, yes, it is true. It really happened. Let's make sure that we add that to our Google form. So first of all, the genre of text that we are reading today is, yes, historical fiction. Good. Make sure that you add that if you haven't already. As a review, to differentiate between what is fact and what is fiction in a historical fiction text, as good readers, we ask ourselves, is the time, place, important people, and important events real things in history? If so, that is a fact. If you need to, pause your video and type that in now. Great. After that, as good readers, we also ask ourselves, well, which parts of the story of STORY are actually coming from the author's imagination, are make-believe? If there's a part in the story that is make-believe and comes from the author's imagination, this is fiction. If you need to, pause your video and add that now. Good. ELA Masters, let's review our last question from yesterday's exit ticket. Yesterday, I told you that today's historical fiction text, The Bracelet, is about a Japanese American girl named Emmy who lives in California in the 1940s. Again, Emmy is a make-believe character. She comes from the author's imagination and was not a real girl in real life. But we're still thinking about why that setting, California in the 1940s, is important. And you all had some pretty cool predictions. One scholar predicted that the fiction text, The Bracelet, the setting might be in the internment camps because during that time, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor during World War II, and they started the internment camps in 1942. Whoa, this scholar did a great job really using his or her schema and the facts from the text to make a great prediction. This scholar said, I predict that Emmy will be sent to these camps. I know because Japanese Americans got sent to the camps in 1940. And President Roosevelt ordered the military to force people of Japanese ancestry into internment camps. Again, Emmy and her family are not real. They are make-believe fiction, but they are of Japanese descent. So this is an interesting prediction. This last prediction says, I predict that she was a little girl in camp and that the bracelet made her happy. I'm really impressed that this scholar was thinking about the title. What could this story be about? We get to find out today, scholars. Remember, just like we did yesterday when we were reading Japanese American internment camps, there were some things that were pretty tough to read, and I know I had some feelings while I was reading and needed to process them. So as we're reading The Bracelet today, which is a historical fiction text, make sure that you have your journal handy to draw any notes or feelings that you might have or complete sentences. When you're done making sure that you have all the correct answers to the questions, go ahead and click Next.